Hey guys, what's up? This is Dr. Matthew Robinson. This is Injustice in America, CJ 3450. Okay, so first thing, the appearance. Yeah, this is about as good as it's going to get for now. I'm under quarantine because I've been sick for 4 weeks, and after 3 weeks, they finally took it seriously and said you need to be tested for the virus. So I have been, and I'm on day 8 without results, but I am under quarantine by myself. Can't see anybody, can't hang out with anybody, and this is as good as it's going to get. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you're staying safe. All right, so here's the deal. On your As You Learn page, you have your assigned readings, of course, from your book. You'll have additional readings as necessary. So in this particular unit on crime, chapter 4 and 5, you'll see a bunch of links. You can read as many or as little of those as you want, but the point is these are real life examples of the things we're talking about in this video and in the next video and also in your book about what crime is and what crime's not. And that's kind of the theme of chapter 4 and 5. So chapter 4 is about things against crimes against property or acts against property, some of which are illegal and some of them are not. The things that are not illegal or that are illegal that we don't focus on are the ones that tend to be committed by very powerful people. And so you'll see the term elite deviants in the chapters. These are deviant, immoral, harmful, wrong acts committed by elites, powerful people. And remember, these are generally the same people that make the law and own the media. So that's one possible reason why we don't focus on them. On the other hand, you have street crime, which is the stuff we tend to focus on, which tends to be the most things we consider serious in our country. All right, so in terms of chapter 4, so you need to read those assignments, read the additional readings, go through your PowerPoint slideshow, and then watch this video and take notes. If you have any questions at all, message me, email me, and I'll be happy to respond ASAP. All right, I'm home. I'm stuck here. I can't go anywhere. All right, so the chapter deals with first, what is crime? You'll see it starts off with a discussion of what's called the natural definition of crime or the normative definition of crime, which just is the idea that there are some things that are just fundamentally wrong and deserving of punishment, regardless of whether it's legal or not. So for me, for example, it's seeing a parent smoking around their kid. Totally legal in most places. Some states are starting to take action against it, but not a crime per se because it's not illegal. But it's so immoral. Imagine blowing smoke in the face of the child you love. This is thousands of chemicals and dozens of known carcinogens right in your baby's face. You might disagree. That's fine, and that's kind of one of the points you'll see in the chapter. People disagree about these things. This is why we have a legal definition of crime, because people disagree. So lawmakers decide, and they say whatever's harmful, bad, deviant, wrong, these are the things that they consider to be actually worthy of being crime, so they make it a crime. So a crime legally is a harmful act that actually violates the criminal law. This is problematic because of who makes the law, and that's one of the themes of chapters 4 and 5 is only the wealthy, only the powerful make the law. So as we've talked about all semester, it's illogical to assume they're going to make the things that they do crimes, even if they're really harmful. So keep that in mind. Now, crime also requires what's called culpability. This is moral blameworthiness. So make sure you know that term. People are blameworthy for committing crime because they do it on purpose, intentional, or they do it without regard to human life or property. They do it carelessly. It's called recklessness. Or they fail to do something they're required to do, and someone gets hurt. That's called negligence. Or they do it knowing the outcome is likely to happen. That's called knowledgeable. So these are discussed chapter 4, these terms of culpability. So make sure you pay attention to those because you will be asked about those on your next exam, which will be after a couple chapters. Okay. Some interesting points. Now, by the way, I did a TED talk on this. So if you search TEDx, letter X, TEDx, Matthew Robinson, crime, something like that, you'll find a whole talk about this next thing. It's kind of fun anyway to me. So the fact that crime is invented through the criminal law that doesn't actually exist in nature means, number one, anything can be a crime. There's examples of that in your book and on that TED talk. Nothing's automatically a crime, no matter how bad it strikes you. So for me, like, it's really immoral for parents to smoke around their kids, but totally legal. And then obviously people disagree about what should be a crime. Only the powerful get to decide, right? We talked about whether or not they even serve our interests. But the point is there are harmful behaviors that are committed with culpability that are committed on purpose or recklessly or negligently or knowingly that are totally legal, acts of the powerful that are totally legal or that we don't focus on, and so they ultimately get away with it. Now, the federal government defines certain crimes as serious based on certain criteria. This is really important because it turns out their definition of serious doesn't even match the numbers. So, for example, a serious crime is the most harmful. A serious crime happens the most frequent. A serious crime is the most pervasive. It happens everywhere. So you'll see in the chapter, uniform crime reports are discussed, and the so-called Part 1 index offenses are the ones that are the most serious, supposedly, which means supposedly they're the most harmful, most frequently occurring, and the most pervasive. Make sure you look at those definitions, okay? This is like intro to criminal justice stuff. There's 4 serious violent crimes, from homicide to aggravated assault, rape, and robbery. And there's 4 serious property crimes, from theft to motor vehicle theft to burglary to arson. And the data are in the chapter. You see theft's the most common, assault is the most common violent crime. Most of those are so-called simple assaults as opposed to aggravated assaults. And those terms are defined in the chapter as well. But things that are not considered serious are things like embezzlement, fraud. These are forms of theft that are committed just through different means. So theft is taking someone's property against their will. Embezzlement is you've given them rightful possession of it and then they take it. Fraud is they trick you out of your money. Somehow 2 wrongs is not as bad as 1. But these are not considered serious. I would argue that's because of who tends to do these things. People that tend to do embezzlement and fraud tend to be pretty well off, so we don't focus on it. You could obviously disagree with that. But you'll see there are entire industries based on fraud, and I would encourage you to look those ones up in the notes to see what I'm talking about. An example would be, buying vitamins and supplements that don't actually contain the vitamins and supplements. This is widespread fraud, right? But again, the idea that these certain crimes are serious means that they're the most harmful, the most frequently occurring, and the most pervasive. But it turns out they're not. So there's a slide in your PowerPoints called Compare the Data. And you'll see on page, I think it's 121, but check that. All the amount of money we lose in street crime is about $16 billion a year versus fraud, which is about $1 trillion. I don't know if you're good at math, but trillion is way bigger than 16 billion, and yet the stuff that costs the most is not considered serious. All right, so the term for that stuff that's considered less serious is, again, elite deviance. These are actually illegal acts by the powerful, but also legal acts that are considered deviant, and they're committed with culpability, again, with legal responsibility. And you'll see these things cause way more harm to Americans, both through property crime, that's chapter 4, and also violent crime, that's chapter 5. Okay, so I'll give you some examples in the chapter. The first is the savings and loan crisis in the 1980s. Read about it. There's a lot of information online as well as in your book. Hundreds of billions of dollars in losses caused through fraud. Okay. The second example in the book is this widespread corporate fraud by corporations like Enron and Tyco and WorldCom, etc., and hundreds of billions of dollars in losses through that fraud. So you'll see that discussed in the chapter as well. Okay, and you also see a discussion of how they did it, how they achieved their fraud. Think of it this way: if you went to the store and bought some groceries, but then in your checkbook or whatever, if you know what a checkbook is, you wrote it down as a deposit instead of a debit, that's what they did. Or you got a bill, but you said, hey, I don't owe this, Mike Roberts owes it or whatever. You just attribute that debt to someone else, that's what they did. They just inflated their amount of their wealth to make them look like good investments when they weren't. And so a lot of people lost a lot of money. Okay. And then, of course, the collapse of the U.S. economy in 2008. Now this, you're old enough to remember. I don't know if you're following the news then, but there's a really good discussion of this in your book. And also, I've put a link in your PowerPoint presentation to an article that I wrote with a student at App, actually, a sociology major, where we summarized what caused the collapse of the U.S. economy in 2008, and we identified the types of fraud that were involved. Very complicated situation dealing with bad mortgages in the housing markets that were knowingly being sold as bad mortgages and knowingly being packaged as investment products on Wall Street and sold to gullible people. We were all being lied to about their value. And you see that the cost of that collapse was $12 to $22 trillion. $12 to $22 trillion. That's between 600 and 1,100 years of street crime in 1 year. Now, if it caused more harm and it's more widespread and it's more frequently occurring, you would think fraud would be a serious crime because that's the definition of serious by the federal government, but it's not. Hence, you see the problem. So the next thing that's discussed in the book is possible reasons why elite deviance is not viewed as serious. So take a look at those possible reasons. Generally speaking, we don't consider it serious because we're not focused on it. It's being done to us by large groups of people rather than individuals. The harms are, not directly happening to you. It's like people make decisions who make decisions, and then eventually people, suffer from it. It's harder to identify the culprits. Oftentimes, it's invisible. It's not necessarily intentional, but there is still culpability. But the point is, these are possible reasons why we don't focus on it. My argument, the argument in the book and the class, is that the people who do it are differently. So consider your typical street criminal, the stereotypical view of a young, poor minority male, right? Even though white people are more criminal, we've talked about that because there's more white people. We have this perception based on the law and the media about who is most likely to harm us. Young, poor, minority male. People that do elite deviance are male. That's the only common element. They tend to be older, whiter, richer than the average person. And by the way, those are the same people who make the law and who own the media. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory. It's the acknowledgement that people who make laws are not going to focus that spotlight on themselves. People who own the media are not going to focus that spotlight on themselves. They're going to focus on other people. That's who the police, courts, and corrections will focus on. Remember, that's basically the definition of innocent bias right there. Bias that comes from the law itself that leads to disparities in criminal justice. So read chapter 4. Read as many of those additional assignments online as you'd like. It's really interesting stuff. It's about things like fraud in the military and stuff like that. It's just the things that actually cost us lots of money that are perfectly legal. Okay? If you have any questions about this material, message me, email me, and I'll respond ASAP. I'm home anyway under quarantine. You guys stay safe out there, and I will see you when we get into chapter 5 next week.